Mysterious statues. On the mysterious Easter Island, located far off the coast of Chile, there are strange statues known as moai. These are typically known as the Easter Island heads. But did you know that they are actually more than just heads? Those giant heads are attached to bodies, which archaeologists found buried underneath the ground. But here's where things get really strange. The Easter Island statues were carved in such a position that they appear to be covering their private areas with their hands, and in the exact same way that the Urfa man, a strange statue found in modern Turkey, carved sometime around 9000 BC, covers his private area. The statues are basically identical, except that they were carved in very different times. The Urfa man was carved in the area that was once known as Mesopotamia by an unknown race of Neolithic people. It's actually the oldest natural sculpture of a human that is life-sized. To compare, the Easter Island statues were made only about 1,000 years ago by a group of Polynesians who settled on the island. So the big question becomes, why were two statues built, almost identical, 8,000 years apart by two different groups of people who never met each other? Is it just a big coincidence, or were the Polynesians somehow influenced by those who lived in early Mesopotamia? And if so, how in the world did that happen? 9. Pyramids around the world. Every civilization from the ancient world built pyramids. There's no getting around it. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Maya, Aztec, Inca, Nubia, Babylonia. They all built pyramids. The Babylonians built something called a ziggurat, from the Babylonian word for tall. The first ones were constructed in the 21st century BC, making ziggurats some of the oldest pyramids in the world. But how did the idea for a tall structure with many tiers shaped like a triangle get passed down from the Babylonians to the Egyptians? And how did the notion of building pyramids then spread across the ocean to the Americas, where literally every culture built some kind of pyramid, usually using them for religious temples? To this day, nobody has been able to answer the question. It makes sense that people in the Mediterranean world built pyramids, and even the Nubians with their small, black, pointy pyramids, since they were neighbors with the Egyptians. The fact that they were built as far as China and on the other side of the world by cultures who had never had any contact with the Eastern world is pretty strange. One of the only things that makes sense is that there was some kind of outside influence that inspired and maybe even helped the emerging cultures of the early world to build pyramid structures. Who this influence was is up for debate, with some people claiming aliens, and some claiming an ancient race of powerful beings called the Anunnaki. 8. The Eternal Spiral. The spiral is a global coincidence and one of the oldest symbols found anywhere in the world. It is one of the most common geometric patterns that has been painted and carved in every region of the world since prehistoric times. However, there is a lot of speculation over the meaning of the spiral symbol. Some say it represented the sun, which does make sense considering the sun was something everyone on Earth could clearly see. Others believed it represented space and the galaxy, with ancient people looking to the stars and then drawing what they saw there. Others still believed the spiral had a more functional purpose, perhaps used as some kind of calendar that separated time in the swirling chapters, seasons, and solstices. Where has this spiral figure been found? It's been popular for at least 6,000 years and found all across Europe in the earliest Neolithic art around. The Celtic people drew spirals in almost everything in Ireland, from burial chambers to standing stones. One of the oldest spiral symbols ever is 18,000 years old, found engraved on a mammoth tusk in Siberia. Even more, societies all over the world created spiral monuments like complex mazes, everywhere from North Carolina to ancient England, and places like the Drumbeg Stone Circle in County Cork, Ireland. To this day, we can only guess at what the fascination was with the spiral, though it almost certainly had something to do with early cultures representing the universe. 7. Mushrooms everywhere. Mushrooms are everywhere and hiding in plain sight, all across the globe. From pre-Columbian art to ancient India, mushrooms can be seen depicted in all kinds of different ways. Even in China, there are humanoid figurines with mushrooms growing out of their heads. Some historians believe that mushrooms held great meaning in almost all ancient societies where they grew. This is especially true for the Harappan civilization, one of the earliest in South Asia. They flourished from between 2500 and 1500 BC and worshipped a plant called soma, which was a hallucinogenic mushroom eaten throughout Siberia and the other nearby regions. Because the mushroom had psychedelic effects, it was treated like a deity. A plant deity also played a huge role in Persian mythology. It was called Hauma, and it actually came from the Indo-Iranian people, from the same ancient society that worshipped the soma mushroom. Even in Hindu mythology, Shiva, the supreme being, is often depicted holding a mushroom in her right hand. The Buddha can even be seen in many different statues as part of a mushroom. But what's really surprising is that the mushroom cult goes all the way to Mexico, where the Maya had a weird fascination with the fungus as well. Could it be that all these ancient cultures were actually obsessed with eating mushrooms and hallucinating? Or was there a more complicated, deeper meaning behind the mushrooms, found everywhere in the iconography of these ancient societies? Why do you think mushrooms have been portrayed in so many different cultures over the years? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Egyptians and Aztecs. There are some rather strange coincidences between the Aztecs and the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians came way before the Aztecs, but the two had a lot in common, and so too did the Maya and the Inca, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. For example, the three major Mesoamerican cultures didn't appear until the 13th century, 2,000 years after Egypt had already fallen out of its prime. Yet, they had some very similar principles. For example, the Egyptians used two main calendars, a religious calendar and a civil calendar. The religious calendar was for keeping the dates of holidays and festivals and tracking the moon, while the civil calendar recorded the amount of time that a pharaoh was in power, as well as agricultural periods. Similarly, the Aztecs had two calendars, their sacred calendar that tracked days that their gods needed sacrifices, and an agricultural calendar to keep track of when harvesting needed to be done. The weirdest part is that both cultures' calendars function on a schedule of 360 days, with these days spread into 18 months. There are honestly too many similarities to even get into, from the use of tombs and pyramids to the religious cults and the similar way both the Egyptians and the Aztecs used metal to decorate much of their artwork. 5. Curious clamps. Speaking of metal, evidence that the ancient cultures of the world had access to metal building supplies is overwhelming. In a bizarre coincidence, many countries, thousands of miles apart, seem to have used metal clamps when building their complicated structures, though none of these clamps have ever actually been found. Evidence of metalwork has been discovered in modern Egypt, Greece, Ethiopia, Armenia, Cambodia, Bolivia, Peru, and even Iran. Even though the metal clamps themselves have long since been removed or pillaged, the markings they left behind are still there. These markings are basically indents, the leftover impressions made by what must have been metal clamps that held huge pieces of stone together. According to archaeologists, tests revealed the clamp impressions were molds in which metal was poured, thereby binding two massive pieces of rock. And if you don't believe me, scientists even found metal still present in Ethiopia inside some of these clamp depressions. The metal is very specific too, crafted from copper, nickel, arsenic, and even iron. But what makes this so unbelievable is that these metals are not widely available in many of the regions where they were used, suggesting somebody else gave the technology to the ancient builders, allowing them to construct biblical-sized monuments, propelling them out of the Stone Age. 4. A history of priests. One of the weirder historical coincidences is that every single place in the world, beginning thousands of years ago, had priests and priestesses as part of their society. Priests have existed since the invention of agriculture, maybe even before that. Some of the earliest known priestesses go back to ancient Sumer, to 2285 BC. The Sumer were really the first ones to make priests and priestesses as important in society as the king or queen. Many kings were also head priests. The coincidence here is that it happened in every society. For an unknown reason, civilizations decided they needed spiritual leaders who would interact with the gods and be in charge of the temples. Egyptian priests staffed temples and gave offerings to the gods, while priests in the Mesoamerican cities of the Maya, Inca, and Aztecs were the ones to deal in human sacrifices. As for ancient Greece, the priestesses were treated a little differently. They were oracles who gave prophecies, and some of the only respected women in all of classical Greece. The point is that wherever there have been people, there have been specially selected individuals chosen to be in charge of religious activities, and it's still going on today. 3. The Maya-China link. The Maya and the Chinese have a lot in common. At least the ancient societies did. According to Jose Enrique Ortiz Lanza with the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico, both ancient cultures had a weird fascination with jade. In Mexico, archaeologists have discovered dead bodies of the Maya covered in masks made of jade, while in Chinese tombs, archaeologists have found dead nobles encased in full suits of jade. But the similarities don't end there. Both the Maya and the Chinese had a high respect for the elderly, with the Mayans inadvertently following some of the teachings of Confucianism. And then there are the gods they worshipped. The Mayan moon goddess Ixchel was almost always depicted as being accompanied by a rabbit, while the Chinese moon goddess Chang'e was also accompanied by a rabbit. They were basically twins, which seems impossible since the two cultures never even met. How could they both have thought of the exact same goddess being accompanied by a rabbit? It seems inconceivable. But for this coincidence, there is a theory. Some archaeologists believe the Mayans actually came from East Asia across the Bering Strait, and that they brought some of the ancient Chinese beliefs with them. There's no evidence of this theory yet, but it's one of the only explanations anyone can come up with, considering there are so many similarities between the two cultures. 2. Anunnaki handbag. One of the strangest symbols found throughout the ancient world, believe it or not, is an image that looks a lot like a modern handbag. The shape of the handbag can be seen in depictions all the way from the ancient Sumerians who lived in what is today Iraq, to the Maori of New Zealand, and even the Olmec culture of Central America. The handbags are seen in carvings of powerful figures, and nobody is really sure what they mean. The first known example of a handbag appearing in an ancient carving comes from the very end of the last Ice Age. The oldest handbag of them all was found in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carved onto stone in 11,000 BC. To make things even more mysterious, nobody knows the purpose of the mountain ruins in which the carving was discovered. Some believe the handbag is a representation of the cosmos. This is because they are almost always seen being held by a god or mythical deity. The gods hold these handbags in the same way a person would hold a basket, and one of the theories is that the basket or handbag actually contains the sacred knowledge of the gods. These gods, some claim, are actually the ancient race of beings known as the Anunnaki, who are said to be the original creators of humankind. 1. Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. Here's a question. Did the Egyptians cross the ocean and land in the American Southwest thousands of years ago? A discovery in the early part of the 20th century suggests that such a thing may have happened. According to a story published in the Arizona Gazette back in 1909, archaeologists funded by the Smithsonian believe that they found proof of an Egyptian civilization that lived inside the Grand Canyon. The archaeologists allegedly discovered a series of caves filled with artifacts that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Egyptians were living in America. The archaeologists found tablets that were engraved with hieroglyphics, though these tablets were eventually lost and never recovered. Today, the Smithsonian actually denies that it ever happened. So, there are either two possibilities. Either a small Egyptian colony really did find their way to the Grand Canyon, and the tablet artifacts were real, and the Smithsonian is lying about it for an unknown reason, or it never happened at all. But would the Smithsonian truly have destroyed artifacts and denied a real scientific finding just to change the official narrative? There are rumors that in 1892, a series of mysterious coffins were found in Alabama, turned over to the Smithsonian Institute, and then lost under dubious circumstances. So, it seems anything is possible.
Number 8. Capuchin mummies. It's not uncommon for archaeologists to uncover crypts beneath monasteries. Over the years, plenty of people get buried underneath old monasteries and abbeys, but the discovery of catacombs under the Capuchin monastery in the Czech Republic wasn't the only surprise laying in wait for investigators. In the medieval crypt, multiple bodies of monks were found undisturbed, but surprisingly, they weren't placed inside coffins. Keeping with traditional burial practices, the monks were known to remove the bodies of their dead brothers from their coffins and place them on the ground so the next to be buried could be laid to rest. Hundreds of years ago, the brothers at the monastery started to bury their dead this way, with the practice continuing into the late 18th century. Instead of the traditional burial you and I are accustomed to, the bodies are placed with a stone slab under their head to prop them up. With their hands crossed over their bodies clutching a rosary, they are left to rest in this natural way. When they were discovered, some of the monks were still dressed in their ceremonial robes. But you might wonder how the bodies remained this way without decaying, right? The underground chamber has a system of ventilation ducts that allows the bodies to mummify, as well as soil that helps to keep the mummies from decaying. Although it might seem like a strange way to honor their dead, over time, 200 monks and followers of the religious order have been interred there. Of course, some of the bodies have been moved over the centuries, and now only 24 remain in the crypts. Number 7. Spiral skeletal burial. Dead bodies being placed in odd patterns are always unsettling, and recently 10 skeletons found in a burial site south of Mexico City were discovered in a particularly strange formation. Laid to rest in an archaeological site called Tlalpan, the bodies were found buried in a spiral, probably as some sort of religious or spiritual exercise, but for us today, it's just plain creepy. The bodies belonged to adults, a child and an infant, and were both female and male. Believed to be part of a ritualistic burial, they were arranged in a circular formation with their arm bones interlocked. 2 of the skeletons were found to have deformities in their skulls, with some of their teeth also deformed. I wonder if they had good dentists back thousands of years ago in Central America. Probably not. As experts studied their finds, they discovered the site dated back to the pre-classical period in Mexico, older than the Aztec Empire. An archaeologist who was part of the team that found the bodies in 2006 said the village associated with the burial lasted about 500 years, placing it between the Ticoman and Zacatenco phase in Mexico's history. Besides being bizarre and looking a bit occult, this strange find offers a unique glimpse into the burial practices of some of Mexico's first people, which has been very informative for archaeologists and anthropologists. Number 6. Peruvian sacrificial tunnel. Leave it to tiny robots to uncover one of the biggest discoveries tied to ancient Peru. A team of American and Peruvian archaeologists using tiny robots to search an ancient complex stumbled upon a network of tunnels below the 3,000-year-old Chavin de Huantar temple in 2018. But the tunnels weren't the only discovery made in the religious and administrative center. 3 skeletons, believed to have been victims of sacrifice, were also uncovered. Armed with cameras, the robots, which were designed by engineers at Stanford University, were sent into the underground tunnel network, where they found the bodies as well as ceramic fragments and tools. A whopping 35 tunnels make up the underground system, dating back to between 1200 and 200 BC. Considered one of the most important discoveries of the last 50 years, the tunnels were said to have been used by priests to carry out rituals using noise and light to make it seem like they had mystical powers. Using remote controls to maneuver the robots, researchers found the bodies belonging to a small boy, a teenager, and a young man. Located in a narrow valley in the high Andes, the Chavin Temple is a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site that was first occupied around 5,000 years ago. But the tunnels were a marvel of innovation, with optical illusions, mirrors, and even psychoactive drugs used to influence visitors that their priests were godlike. Sunlight, roaring water, and elaborate stone carvings also brought an extra air of the supernatural to peasants who came from miles away to experience spiritual enlightenment. Even if some of it was a smokescreen, the important thing is that the site brought power and authority to the Peruvian people, and it would never have been found without the clever use of modern technology. Number 5. Kenyan Burial Mound. Most massive burial monuments are dedicated to kings or pharaohs, but a newly discovered burial mound in Kenya was made by the people for the people, with bodies of tribe members of all ages buried side by side. Known as the Lothagam North Pillar Site, the mound is one of the earliest monumental sites in Eastern Africa. Made up of rocky rings, stone columns, and burial mounds, the site is home to generations of tribe members, roving herders who buried their dead by a lake in what is now Kenya. The oldest of 6 known monument sites built between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, the cemetery has a 100-foot wide raised stone platform site capped with monolithic basalt and sandstone columns that experts believe were hauled from nearly a mile away. Inside the platform, a burial chamber that once held up to almost 600 graves was also found. First discovered in the 1960s, the site had been studied for decades, uncovering the bodies, which were buried with colorful jewelry, hippo ivory bangles, and elaborate headdresses. The most stunning piece found so far was a headpiece made of over 400 gerbil teeth. That's right, gerbil teeth. Imagine how much effort it would have taken to turn a bunch of minuscule teeth into headwear. With the discovery of the monument and its unique burials of elders buried with infants and women buried alongside men, Lothagam North is a fascinating monument that could reshape the perception of ancient societies. Number 4. Decapitated skeletons. Leave it to modern technology to identify and unlock the genes of more than 80 skeletons found in a Roman cemetery in England. All aged under 45 when they died, the skeletons of 80 individuals were first unearthed a decade ago, but it took until 2016 for their origins to be made clear. Using genome technology, the 1800-year-old skeletons, who were found underneath gardens at Driffield Terrace, were discovered to have Syrians and Palestinians among them. But it isn't their far-flung origins that stunned researchers. It's the fact that most of the men had been decapitated with their skulls tucked between their legs, placed at their feet, or laid on their chests. Found in York, which was once a major outpost on Rome's distant frontier, some of the bodies were linked to people living in modern-day Wales. Many of the skeletons had signs of healed injuries, with a few showing bite marks from a large predator like a lion or bear. But the most stunning discovery was that half of the bodies were decapitated just after they died. So why were they decapitated? Experts believe the site was once a special burial place for those who fought as gladiators in arenas until the late 4th century AD. How did they know that? Well, they seem to have stronger muscles in their right arms, a trait that Roman slaves who trained to fight as gladiators often had. Given the fact that bouts usually ended with a loser being decapitated, the discovery marks the location of the world's best preserved gladiator graveyard. Well, at least they were buried with their heads. Do you think you would have done well as a gladiator? Or would you have been food for the lions and bears? Tell me how you'd try to survive down in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more awesome videos just like this one. Number 3. Palermo Catacombs. Mummification isn't just for the ancient Egyptians. It became a well-known practice in Sicily, where the Capuchin catacombs are located. One of the world's most well-known cultural heritage sites, these creepy catacombs of Palermo are the perfect place for fans of the macabre to visit. A cemetery for brothers of the convent of the Capuchin friars, this site is home to countless corpses of people who died between the 17th and 19th centuries. Originally built as a simple cemetery to bury the monks of the monastery, the friars first buried their dead in a mass grave under the altar of St. Anne. As the community grew, the pit quickly became overcrowded, so a larger cemetery was built to transfer the friars already buried. At that time, the friars made a startling discovery. 45 of the bodies had been naturally mummified without decomposing. Believing it was an act of God, the friars decided to display the bodies of their brothers as relics instead of burying the remains. You might think the burials took place in the ancient past, but up until 1782, the convent accepted burials from laypeople, expanding and adding more corridors. Thousands of wealthy citizens and local standout citizens could be buried there. But it wasn't cheap. It took generous donations to afford the mummification process. And later, the bodies were placed on eternal display in special nooks in the underground cemetery. Kind of bizarre, don't you think? Number 2. China's hanging coffins. In the southern Sichuan province of China, you might notice a strange sight when you look up in the opposing cliffs of the Yangtze River. 30 caskets that date back hundreds of years sit anchored to the limestone rocks almost 100 feet in the air. Both inside the coffins and attached to the outside, there are scraps of clothing, bones, and ceramics as tribute to those buried inside. Found across a large area of the remote valleys in central China, the coffins line the cliff face, balanced on wooden stakes or stacked high. The oldest of the coffins date back 3,000 years, but there is no clear explanation for why the dead were placed this way. Some ancient texts say that those placed higher on the cliffs were more devout in their religion, while others are a bit more practical. They say they were just placed there to keep them away from animals. Every year, new sites are discovered, with 131 found in 2015 in the province of Hubei alone. But that doesn't mean experts are any closer to figuring out how the people transported the coffins, the bodies, and all the funeral objects to the cliff caves. One researcher determined to figure out the mystery rappelled down a cliff face to get a closer look at some of the hanging coffins. Most rested on rotting stakes, which required bamboo scaffolding to secure the site before researchers could examine the strange boxes. When they did, they found some of the coffins had multiple bodies in them. Each one was dug out from a single solid piece of wood and packed with sand, which made them incredibly heavy. Even though it might seem like a strange practice, Tibetans and Mongolians practice a different type of sky burial where they offer the bodies of the deceased to vultures or other animals. But cliff burials, also found in the Philippines, are often only accessible by river, making one wonder exactly how the ancient people were able to transport them to these precarious final resting places. But that doesn't mean the coffins aren't targets for looters. At some sites, the coffins have been robbed for their valuable artifacts, including swords and other valuables. As much as researchers try to determine how and why these cliffside burials took place, one may never truly know why a few groups of people adopted this unique practice. Number 1. The Bone Church. If you're a fan of the macabre, the Sedlec Ossuary Bone Church is the place to be. Located in the Czech Republic, the church is made entirely of bones. That seems awfully occult and disturbing, right? 1 hour east of Prague, the cemetery was originally founded in 1142 as the oldest Cistercian monastery. At one point, almost 30,000 people were buried there, mostly victims of epidemics. As it grew in popularity as one of Europe's most sought-after burial places, a Gothic chapel and ossuary were built there too. But one look at the ossuary, the room where the bones of the deceased are kept, and you can see that it's no ordinary place. After a fire destroyed the cathedral and monastery, the bones were removed and stacked for safekeeping. But an architect and woodcarver brought in to recreate the interior of the church had a vision, one that saw them taking the bones of the dead and making something beautiful from them. Bleaching the bones, the woodcarver used them in his own style of macabre art, stringing skulls and bones across entryways. He also created elaborate candelabras and crosses made from femurs. The most striking piece in the place is a massive bone chandelier with skulls as candle holders. Between 40,000 and 70,000 bones make up the interior designs of the church, with visitors allowed to walk freely among the creepy decorations. To keep everything looking in tip-top shape, a specialist comes in periodically to clean every bone on the chapel with a toothbrush. If this site isn't too ghoulish, you can visit the church to marvel at the remains of so many real skeletons used in one man's morbid artistry.
Number 9. Well of Santa Cristina. During the 12th or 11th century BC, a culture called the Nuragic civilization built a shrine complex near the modern-day commune of Poli Latino in Sardinia, Italy. Dubbed the Well of Santa Cristina, this fascinating, well-preserved, modern-looking monument sits on a basaltic plateau. It was built with seemingly perfect proportions and geometry, making it seem like a much newer structure than it actually is. An elliptical enclosure made from rocks, called a themenos, surrounds a trapezoidal staircase that leads underground and gets more and more narrow as it descends. The entrance is covered by architraves, which look like an upside-down staircase. At the bottom of the stairs, there's a well that sits beneath a 23-foot-high dome. The Nuragic culture lasted from the 18th century BC to the 2nd century AD, and its surviving architecture reflects a society of remarkably skilled masons. But because the Nuragic people left no written records, the true meaning of the Santa Cristina is a complete mystery. It's clear that the structure was sacred, and that it probably served as a ceremonial meeting site. But the exact beliefs that inspired the well's design and construction are unknown. Since the well is the site's focal point, scholars theorize that it was used by a water cult. They also believe that the structure may have been an astronomical observatory, because sunlight shines down the water every year during the equinoxes. every 18.6 years during an event called a lunar standstill. The moonlight shines through an opening at the very top of the well. Unfortunately, without documented sources, this is probably as close as we'll ever get to understanding the Nuragic civilization's spiritual views. Number 8. Huanchaquitos Las Llamas. Over 500 years ago, sometime between 1400 and 1450, 3 adults and 269 children between the ages of 5 and 14 years old were sacrificed in a ritual in northeastern Peru. The gruesome event would eventually become known as the largest mass child sacrifice ever discovered. When local pizzeria owner Michael Spano noticed human bones in a vacant lot near his home, he contacted archaeologist Gabriel Prieto, whose team spent 8 years excavating the site. It quickly became clear that the mass burial was carried out by the Chimu culture, yet the graves were not characteristic of typical Chimu burials. Instead of being buried upright, as was custom in their culture, the children were laid on their backs or curled up on their sides. Many had cut marks on their sternum and ribs. Pottery and other typical grave goods were absent from the burial, and numerous children were buried next to llamas and alpacas, which the Chimu people valued as a source of food and transportation. Like the children, the animals were slashed across the sternum. The Chimu culture is shrouded in mystery, complicating researchers' ability to determine the circumstances surrounding the massacre. The civilization left behind no written records, leaving modern experts to rely solely on artifacts and heavily biased observations recorded by Spanish conquistadors. To make things even more confusing, this is the first physical evidence of the Chimu culture ever sacrificing children. Researchers suspect that rising seas, heavy rains, and the severe effects of El Niño ravaged the society's political and economic well-being, prompting the Chimu people to act outside of tradition and sacrifice some of the most valuable assets, children and animals, in a desperate plea to the gods for relief. Number 7. Neolithic menhirs. A menhir is a large, ancient, megalithic stone that stands upright. Also called standing stones, they are sometimes found alone, with no other rocks nearby, or as part of a circular or linear arrangement. While excavating ahead of a construction project in Valais, Switzerland, recently, a team of archaeologists came across a formation of 13 medium-sized menhirs. The rocks are currently undergoing scientific dating procedures to determine their age, but experts believe that they were erected during the Neolithic or Bronze Age. Their exact meaning and purpose are unknown. The discovery happened in the commune of Saint Leonard, in a region that was especially active during Neolithic times. In 2019, archaeologists identified a linear arrangement of 6 menhirs in the town of Sion, just a few miles from Saint Leonard. The largest stone found in Sion weighs nearly 2.2 tons and features an engraving of a male figure with a sun-like motif surrounding his face. Another menhir is covered in numerous small circular depressions. Similar markings have been found in Italy, but this is the first and only time they've ever been seen in France. A press release revealed that some of the stones appear to be deliberately broken. It's possible that they were repurposed for other building projects, but nobody knows for sure. The mystery of why people broke the menhirs has lingered since 1961, when 30 standing stones and several collective tombs, known as dolmens, were found just 1,300 feet from the site. Researchers concluded their analysis of the 6 menhirs by stating that the question remains open. Do you have any idea what these menhirs were used for? What do you think they represented? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. An urban precinct. During the Hellenistic period between 305 BC and 30 BC, Egypt experienced its first building boom. After the death of the last Ptolemaic ruler, Cleopatra VII, Rome conquered Egypt. The Roman-Byzantine presence lasted until the 7th century, when Islamic rule entered the region. By then, Egypt had many long-established urban settlements. Simply put, there was no need to build more population centers, so no new cities sprang up from late antiquity onward. New settlements were extremely rare. So, archaeologists were a little shocked to discover a well-planned urban precinct dating back to the late 6th century in Marea, an ancient port settlement and industrial center to the west of Alexandria. Excavations at the site have been ongoing since the 1970s, but this is the first settlement of its type to be found there. According to newly published research, it was built over the ruins of a Roman farm and winery. The precinct was filled with one-story modular buildings from between the 6th and 8th centuries. Occupying some 32 acres, the site may have contained neatly lined shops, houses, and structures that were used by Christian pilgrims. A noskomeon, or hospital, along with public baths and toilets, testified to the urban planners' concern for public health. Even the seasoned experts who work at Morea describe the unlikely discovery as rare and a big surprise. Number 5. Moon tracking stones of Mull. Scotland's Isle of Mull is home to an array of mysterious prehistoric stone monuments, including a stone circle and several collections of standing stones. Archaeologists believe that the sites were built around 3,000 years ago, but their exact age and purpose are a mystery. Some scholars think that the arrangements were built for tracking the moon's path year-round. They've determined that several of the standing stone collections are positioned for following the lunar cycle, which is closely linked with the tides and fertility cycles. But this only partially explains the function of these sites. Crystal and quartz shards have been found near several of the monuments. One theory holds that they were smashed against the standing stones during rituals, possibly to reflect a nearby fire or the moon. Some experts have even suggested that the stones represented portals to the underworld. Since Neolithic times, quartz was valued for its believed ability to connect with the afterlife, according to a Dig It Scotland article by archaeologist Claire Ellis. The mineral has also been found at Neolithic ritual sites in other parts of Scotland and in Ireland. Since there are no written records from these early populations, all experts can do is speculate about what really went on at these sites and why. Number 4. Plain of Jars. Deep in the mountains of northern Laos, a seemingly surreal landscape known as the Plain of Jars is dotted with over 3,000 megalithic jars. Scattered along the central plain of the Chiang Khoang Plateau, the huge bizarre vessels sometimes stand alone and are seen in clusters of up to several hundred. Most are made from sandstone, but some were carved from granite and limestone. They were discovered during the 1930s and have perplexed scholars ever since. The jars were originally dated back to sometime between 1240 and 660 BC, but their true age is unknown. Their purpose is also a mystery. While some researchers believe they may have been used in prehistoric burials, local legend claims that the vessels stored food, alcohol, rainwater, and other things. It's difficult to study the jars because they are situated among thousands or perhaps millions of unexploded Vietnam-era bombs. Less than 10% of them have been thoroughly investigated, but excavations are on the rise as archaeologists pinpoint sites that are safe to explore, and research is becoming more accurate thanks to advanced technology. Some of the jars have been reliably traced to the 2nd millennium BC. Meanwhile, some human skeletons and bundled and jarred collections of bones were recently dated between the 9th and 13th centuries AD. Previous research dated other human remains to around the same age as the jars. The findings show that in some cases, the jars predate the human remains by thousands of years. Researchers can't explain this time discrepancy, but they think the jars were reused repeatedly over time, and that the sites maintained ritual significance over many centuries. The identity of the people who created the vessels is a mystery. Scholars are also trying to figure out how people moved the jars to their current locations from the quarry they were sourced from 5 miles away. With each jar standing at up to 10 feet tall and weighing as much as 33 tons, it seems like an impossible task in the absence of modern machinery. Number 3. Amazon rock paintings. Around 12,000 years ago, indigenous people living in what is now southeastern Colombia covered miles of rock wall with thousands of paintings. The images mostly depict Ice Age beasts, including mastodons, giant sloths, camelids, and horses. There are also humanoid figures, hunting scenes, geometric shapes, and other animals such as deer, alligators, bats, monkeys, turtles, porcupines, and more. Made with red ochre pigment, the paintings have survived into modern times. They comprise the largest collection of rock art in the Americas. Indigenous locals have long known about the images, which they consider part of their heritage, and regional experts began studying the site decades ago. But the outside world first learned about the artwork recently last year, when the press erroneously described it as a new discovery. Some of the murals were painted so high up, they required the use of special ladders. They were created by hunter-gatherers who survived on fish, reptiles, mammals, and fruit. The artwork is an invaluable component of the researchers' ongoing quest to determine who the Amazon's first settlers were. Sadly, the failure to acknowledge and consult those who already knew about it makes it seem as though the project is already off on the wrong foot. Researchers are still working to interpret the meaning of the images. Meanwhile, tensions seem to be growing between locals and outsiders, who are eager to offer their opinion, but seemingly less willing to listen. While some scholars simply see extinct megafauna, others believe the murals depict more modern species. For example, what looks like a giant sloth to some seems like a capybara to others. Some contend that the artwork conveys a deeper representation, such as the conflict between indigenous people and Spanish colonizers. Whatever the case though, it's clear that more investigation is needed to come to any sort of definitive conclusion. Number 2. A Lost Kingdom. According to Greek mythology, anything King Midas touched turned to gold. But his penchant for the finer things in life eventually caught up to him, and as a consequence, he died of starvation. A Phrygian ruler named King Midas really did exist during the 8th century BC, according to historical sources, which claim that he was married to a Greek princess and traded extensively with the Greeks. He allegedly committed suicide. But archaeological evidence of the king's existence is scarce at best, leaving researchers with little to work with in terms of distinguishing fact from fiction. A possible major breakthrough came in 2019 when archaeologists discovered the remnants of a lost kingdom at a mound site in Turkey called Turkmen Karahoyuk. A local farmer tipped experts off to the presence of a large stone, or stele, with strange inscriptions that had appeared in a nearby canal. They made a beeline for the site and immediately recognized the artifact's carvings as Luwian, a Bronze and Iron Age language specific to the region. The hieroglyphs describe the defeat of the Anatolian kingdom of Phrygia around 3,000 years ago. Evidence suggests that the stele may reference the King Midas, who is known for his golden touch. According to the text, a rival ruler named Hartapu captured Midas. Who Hartapu was and what kingdom he ruled, nobody knows. But the story suggests that the site became Hartapu's capital following his conquest of Phrygia. The findings are preliminary, but offer a promising start to learning more about this ancient society that was lost to history until now, and the enemy king who is so often mentioned in stories, but conspicuously absent from historical records. Number 1. World's oldest war memorial. During the 3rd millennium BC, 30 fallen soldiers were laid to rest with a collection of grave goods in a massive burial mound. Located near the Euphrates River in what is now the Syrian town of Talltanic, the site is known today as the White Monument. Researchers long believed that the mound contained the mass grave of enemy fighters, but recently, archaeologists took a closer look, suggesting that the individuals buried there were actually members of the local community and militia. Similar burials have been found throughout northern Syria, but the White Monument is noticeably different. Unlike the other mass graves, where soldiers' bodies were haphazardly thrown into a pile, the deceased were arranged in an organized fashion after being transported to the site from elsewhere. The careful placement of the bodies indicates that they were held in higher regard than enemy troops, suggesting that the burial is a tribute to the fallen. If this is true, it means that the 4,500-year-old site is the world's oldest war memorial. Speaking with The Guardian, University of Toronto professor Anne Porter pointed out that experts don't know whether the individuals buried at the White Monument are the losers or the victors of the conflict they died in. Either way, she explained, it appears as though they were laid to rest with honor. These findings came to light after researchers re-examined the site, which was first excavated in the 1980s and 90s. The team acknowledged that the new information warrants a deeper investigation of other burial mounds throughout the region, in case previous studies missed important details that could give accurate context to the sites. Number 8. The Wei Dynasty Mummy. Archaeologists doing an excavation at China's Inner Mongolia region have uncovered some amazing finds at a 1,500-year-old cemetery. The excavations were conducted between 2012 and 2014, and according to archaeologists, the collected artifacts and human remains suggest that the burial was for members of a wealthy family, like the chieftain of the indigenous Gaosh people who lived during the reign of the Northern Wei Dynasty. This ancient tribe ruled large parts of Mongolia and northern China between 386 and 534 AD. Researchers found one of the corpses swaddled in yellow silk. The deceased individual was buried in a coffin wearing leather boots, a gold necklace, a belt, an ornament headband, and fancy rings. Archaeologists are currently in the process of carefully removing the silk garment from the skeleton to conduct further analysis. An interesting painting was also found on the coffin, depicting a house with a blue roof and bright red pillars. The team believes the cemetery may have been looted before their excavation, and had this to say. In the center of the house is seated the occupant, surrounded by his many white-faced attendants, who are standing or sitting and wearing round hoods. The exaggerated face and body proportions of the main occupant distinguish him sharply from the attendants. Along with the elaborately dressed skeleton, a silver bowl featuring a depiction of ancient Greek deities was also unearthed. According to Song Guodong from the Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology, the figures are actually Zeus, his wife Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, to be located in a 1,500-year-old cemetery in Inner Mongolia makes the discovery very important. Not only is it an ancient relic that deserves to be preserved, it also shows how goods and valuables were traded along the Silk Route between Asia and Europe for thousands of years. Number 7. Hidden Neolithic Sites. Who would have thought that the blistering summer temperatures across the UK landscape in the summer of 2018 would reveal a number of archaeological sites that traced back millennia of human activity? Ancient farms and settlements of Neolithic people have been popping up all across England in countless fields and farmland. But to have so many make an appearance around the same time was eye-opening. Previously invisible for many years, it turns out these stark weather conditions are helping in finding hidden and lost relics. From England to Wales and everywhere in between, newly revealed sites, including cemeteries and the outlines of Roman villas, are now visible, giving archaeologists a first-hand look at fascinating traces to the past. As droughts shriveled gardens and scorched crops, the lines of ancient archaeological sites became clear as day when viewed from the air. As grass and crops grow at different heights or in different colors, they naturally reveal the buried foundations and ditches of ancient villages and burial mounds. One of the more fascinating finds occurred in Yorkshire, where the distinctive shape of an Iron Age square barrow, or a mound of earth raised over a mass grave, was located. Other sites in Yorkshire being excavated have revealed stunning burials with grave goods inside, including chariots. Seemingly average long straight lines in prehistoric fields that stretch several kilometers in length are believed to be ritual processional routes used by ancient people. Iron Age settlements surrounding a circular ditch have also been uncovered in Cornwall, as well as Roman farms, fields, and paddocks unearthed in deserts. Number 6. Naurs, the subterranean city. Leave it to the French to have a subterranean settlement complete with bakeries and chapels. In the hidden underground city of Naurs, 28 galleries and 300 chambers were found more than 70 feet underground, with pathways that measure from 1 to 2 miles long. It began its existence as a limestone quarry built by the Romans during the 2nd century AD. But as more conflicts rattled the countryside into the early Middle Ages, people began to use it as a place to hide from invading armies, eventually constructing wells, stables, bakeries, and chapels underground. They even constructed chimneys from the bakers' ovens. They used the heat from the fire and routed it through the cottages and other structures above ground, so no one would know they were hiding below. Viking invaders were even known to inhabit the underground settlement in the 9th century AD. It was later abandoned as Europe became more stable. The underground city was only recently discovered in 1887 by a man renovating his house. But it wasn't always a haven for peace and calm. At one time, the underground city was used as a headquarters by Nazi forces during World War II. It is now an example of how locals were able to adapt to the changing environment. The underground city of Naurs is an important part of life and history in ancient France. Would you like to see this ancient underground city for yourself? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Palmyra Castle. In the province of Homs, Syria, a 13th century castle sits high on a hill overlooking the historic site of Palmyra. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the great city now sits in ruins. Designated a national monument in Syria in 2007, the castle sits on a raised bedrock foundation, fortified with tall, thick walls and a moat that surrounds the site, which is only accessible through a drawbridge. Built in the 13th century, the castle has been the site of conflict for many years. It was put in jeopardy in 2013 when the Syrian civil war broke out and continued to be the center of much conflict when ISIS troops took the castle in 2015. Eventually, the Syrian government succeeded in retaking the castle, but unfortunately, a lot of damage was already done. The main staircase leading to the entrances was completely destroyed. But luckily, the structures remained mostly intact, and the Syrian government declared they will restore it to its former glory. Located northeast of Damascus, Palmyra was once a great city and an important cultural center for the ancient world. The influence of several civilizations, including Greeks and Romans, can be seen portrayed in the art and architecture. Originally, Palmyra was established as a caravan oasis, mentioned in the archives of writings from the 2nd millennium BC. An important city on the trade route linking Persia, India, and China with the Roman Empire, Palmyra had a great colonnade street with public monuments including temples and ornamental funerary sculptures done in the Greco-Roman art style with Persian influences. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the ruined city was discovered by travelers, remaining under the rule of Romans until the 3rd century AD. Other natural causes also threatened the site, with the towers and citadel vulnerable to minor earthquakes. Now designated a national monument, the castle is protected by the National Antiquities Law, allowing conservation and restoration to not only save the site, but preserve the ancient town as well. Number 4. Mohenjo-Daro, Pakistan. In the 26th century BC, an ancient city known as Mohenjo-Daro was constructed in modern-day Pakistan. Becoming one of the largest cities in the Indus Valley civilization, the site was one of the first urban centers in human history and is one of the best preserved sites of the Indus civilization, the earliest known civilization of the Indian continent. It was built in 2500 BC, which is around the same time the pyramids were being built in Egypt. Spanning nearly 500 acres, 5 times the size of the Vatican City, archaeologists believed it was once a seat of power for the Indus civilization. It was divided in two, with the citadel and the lower town as the main areas of the site. The citadel was home to the city's monuments, including the Great Bath, a 900 square foot tank that is fed from a sophisticated water system, which also meant the ancient houses had toilets and an elaborate system of freshwater wells throughout the city. In the lower town, an intricate water system served between 20,000 and 40,000 residents. Strangely, there are no places of worship in the Mohenjo-Daro, and no government buildings or royal tombs like other major civilizations. Some believe the society wasn't built around state interests, but instead the class structure that made all the people in the site equal. 600 years later, after its first construction, the city collapsed, but no one knows why. About 4,000 years after it fell into ruin, archaeologists visited the site, and for decades they unearthed various modern-day conveniences that showed how the people of Mohenjo-Daro were years ahead of their time. Number 3. Napata and Meroe, Sudan. Just because the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza get all the attention doesn't mean there aren't other ancient sites in Africa to be discovered. Another historic city in northern Sudan, known as the Kingdom of Kush, is an important part of the cultural landscape on the continent. Part of Nubia, a region between the cataracts of the Nile, Kush is one of the most famous civilizations to emerge, with 3 kingdoms that dominated for more than 3,000 years. The most powerful city-state in the region was Kerman, which thrived between 2450 BC and 1450 BC. Known for controlling the Nile Valley between the 1st and 4th cataracts, Kerman was a powerful territory that was primarily rural and had about 2,000 residents who practiced agriculture, raised livestock, and hunted and fished. Their people also produced ceramics and metal goods, as well as mud brick structures and temples that were used in funerary chapels. From about 300 BCE to the 4th century CE, the capital of Meroe, a port city of Nile, held important trade routes to the Red Sea and the African interior. In an agriculturally fertile area, it was positioned next to lucrative iron and gold mines. One of the most significant artifacts of the culture were tomb pyramids, similar to those in Egypt. One main difference between the Egyptian pyramids and those at Meroe was that they didn't have tombs. Instead, the burial chambers sat beneath the pyramid. As the Roman Empire came to Egypt and dominated the people, Kush became weaker and Meroe was abandoned, leaving behind a legacy of statues, stone monuments, and elaborate paintings that detail a legendary kingdom that helped define the political and cultural landscape of Northeast Africa for more than 1,000 years. Number 2. The Hawara Labyrinth. Originally believed to be just a myth, in 2008, a team of archaeologists scanned the ground near Hawara, Egypt, and found a lost labyrinth below the sand. Discovered 56 miles south of Cairo, a huge mortuary temple once stood next to the Black Pyramid as part of a complex of buildings, galleries, and courtyards. Researchers found an array of thousands of underground halls, temples, and chambers. The structure remained hidden since the 1800s, when archaeologists first discovered the remains of a huge stone foundation 984 feet broad and 12 feet beneath the sand, concluding that they were the remnants of the foundations for the labyrinth they thought had been destroyed long ago. Archaeologists abandoned the idea that they would find anything. Then in 2008, evidence of the structure was discovered. Scanning the area using ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists found the lost labyrinth. Built by Amenemhet III, the site was described in writings by Herodotus, who claims he counted 3,000 rooms in the funeral complex in the 5th century BC. One of the most incredible ancient sites ever discovered, the underground chambers and tunnels were reportedly once surrounded by 40 columns on each side and a roof made from a single stone slab. He also detailed carved panels with paintings and elaborate hieroglyphs. The labyrinth, now rediscovered through using modern technology, could be one of the most incredible discoveries in the history of Egypt. Number 1. The mystery of the ancient Egyptian city in the United States. Sure, it may sound like a conspiracy theory, but whispers of a lost ancient city in the Grand Canyon tied to an ancient Egypt still exists hundreds of years after first revealed. In the early 1900s, as archaeologists from the Smithsonian Institute surveyed the western United States, explorers traveled down the Colorado River to Yuma to document the unexplored area. In the early 1900s, a news article described a lost city that an explorer discovered while passing the area of Lake Powell Dam. An archaeologist from the Smithsonian claims to have discovered a mysterious cavern that could trace back to the great pharaoh Ramesses in Egypt. Located a mile underground, he found a long passage that linked to a massive chamber with multiple passageways radiating from the center. Detailing several hundred rooms, he also detailed war weapons, including copper instruments within the site. He also reported a massive carving of a cross-legged god sitting with a flower in each of his hands, and urns made from copper and gold, as well as tablets of stone covered in mysterious hieroglyphs. He claims to have found a large chamber with tiers of mummies stacked on shelves, with some in clay and others wrapped in bark fabric. But is the story true? Published in the Arizona Gazette, the article was the only one ever released that detailed the underground Egyptian city hidden in the Grand Canyon. In modern times, researchers have continued to look into the report from the newspaper to determine if the ancient Egyptian city is actually real or a figment of one writer's imagination. Some wonder whether the truth about the city was hidden from the public to prevent explorers and inventors from traveling across the Grand Canyon looking for clues and putting their lives in danger. With no further evidence, the mystery of this lost city only becomes more compelling the longer the truth remains hidden.
Number 9. The Hawara Labyrinth. Imagine finding a secret labyrinth buried in the desert. In his famous 5th century work titled Histories, the Greek historian Herodotus described a massive underground temple with 3,000 rooms that were covered in paintings and hieroglyphs. He called it the Labyrinth, and was not the first classic author to write about it. The fabled complex was mentioned as early as the 3rd century BC in ancient texts from multiple famous scholars, some of whom even claimed that they visited this bizarre place. Based on these accounts, it's unclear whether the labyrinth was deliberately designed to be a maze, or if its sheer enormity made it easy to get lost in. Researchers have been trying to track down the site since as far back as the 17th century, when a German Jesuit scholar named Athanasius Kircher created the first pictorial reconstructions of it based on written records, but the labyrinth remained steeped in mystery. In 2008, archaeologists reportedly found evidence of a huge structure in the sand. Many believe this could be the Hawara Labyrinth, but the Egyptian government quickly suppressed all communications about the discovery, citing national security concerns. Not surprisingly, this seems suspicious and begs the question of whether the authorities are trying to hide something that they don't want the public to know about. Number 8. Aliens built the pyramids. You've probably heard of Egypt's most famous pyramids, but did you know the alternative explanations for how they were built? It's a little wild to think that they were built over 4,500 years ago, just outside of modern-day Cairo. These monuments functioned as tombs for queens and pharaohs. And yes, how the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids without modern technology has long been a source of debate among scholars. The biggest of the structures, known as the Great Pyramid, was built from millions of precision-cut stones, weighing at least 2 tons each. Even today, building something so massive would be a major undertaking. In addition to their sheer size, the pyramids are said to align with the stars of the Orion's Belt constellation. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the pyramids were built by ancient aliens, or at least with help from extraterrestrials, that these magnificent structures simply can't be the work of mortals alone. They're too big, too accurately measured and placed. Not to mention, the pyramids of Giza are in considerably better shape than some newer pyramids that were built hundreds of years later. Of course, just because scientists lack an explanation for how the pyramids were built and how fast they were built, doesn't mean it was impossible for human hands to put them together. Conspiracy theories about ancient aliens building impressive monuments may seem crazy but harmless, but there's a growing school of thought that this type of pseudo-archaeology is inherently racist because it discredits the ingenuity of ancient civilizations that were non-white. Of course, most people who subscribe to beliefs about ancient aliens would be quick to dismiss those concerns and just say they're looking for answers that science isn't providing. What do you think? Is it racially insensitive to talk about aliens building the pyramids? Is it discrediting the people who are involved? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos just like this one. Number 7. Ancient pharaohs were part alien. One of the strangest conspiracy theories about ancient Egypt, which began circulating online in recent years, claims that the pharaohs were human-alien hybrids. It's based on an Egyptian origin myth that describes the Zep-Tepi, or first time, when the gods descended from the sky in eggs or boats, sparking a so-called golden age. The theory also builds on the belief that ancient aliens helped build the pyramids, which seem impossible for humans to have built on their own given their sheer magnitude and precision. It's a leap to assume that aliens imparted their knowledge and wisdom to the civilization. It's even more outlandish to believe that extraterrestrials had babies with the ancient Egyptians. But some people will be open to pretty much anything that sounds more exciting than the boring hypothesis, which was that ancient Egyptian engineers calculated how to move these large stones with the technology available to them at the time. Number 6. The Hall of Records. Edgar Cayce, an American clairvoyant who lived during the first half of the 20th century, claimed that there's a secret library called the Hall of Records beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. In it, he said there are invaluable historical documents. Scholars argue that there's no evidence that such a place ever existed. Egyptian archaeologists excavated the site in 1998 and claimed that they found several natural caves and no artifacts. But many people believe that the Hall of Records is real. They accuse the Egyptian government and mainstream experts of blocking outside researchers from investigating. These seemingly outlandish conspiracy theorists think that authorities deny access to the site because they're hiding something, that they're keeping secrets about what's really there. Uncovering the Hall of Records would expose a wealth of information about ancient Egypt and the world in general, according to those who believe in it. They also claim that the ancient Egyptians may not have left the documents that are supposedly inside, but that perhaps an advanced ancient society is responsible for the library's contents. Some have even suggested that the people who lived on the mythical island of Atlantis engineered the Hall of Records. What do you think? Number 5. The pyramids contain secret advanced technology. If anyone knows what's inside the pyramids of Giza, they aren't talking. Experts and government officials claim that they don't know what the pyramids contain and that they haven't explored the structures more thoroughly because they do not want to disrespect or damage the heritage within. During the 1990s, archaeologists discovered a secret door with red writing on the outside in one of the pyramids. Using a robot, the team drilled a small hole and investigated behind the door. Nothing was found, according to Zahi Hawass, the former Minister of State of Antiquities Affairs. But he refused to procure video footage, proving that the search was fruitless and the Egyptian government would not let outside researchers explore the site. Consequently, many people speculated that the archaeologists found something fascinating and that the authorities wanted to keep it a secret from the public. The suspected contents include vast treasure, ancient technology that was shockingly advanced for its time, dead aliens, or dead or missing celebrities. In 2017, scientists announced the discovery of a void at least 100 feet long inside the largest pyramid, which is dedicated to the pharaoh Khufu. It is the first large inner structure identified within the pyramid since the 19th century and is situated above a tunnel similar in size called the Grand Gallery. The researchers did not explore the void firsthand or with cameras. Instead, they used a technology called cosmic ray muon radiography, which helps to identify solid and empty spaces in places that are inaccessible to the naked eye. They therefore don't know what the newly discovered tunnel looks like, what it was used for, or if there's anything inside it. Is it possible that these chambers house any of the items or people that conspiracy theorists believe could be in there? Mainstream scholars would say no, but other investigators beg to differ, and anything short of proof to the contrary will not convince them otherwise. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. Number 4. Pyramid artwork that predates the pyramids. In 1907, a British archaeologist found odd carvings on an ostrich egg in a tomb containing 5,000-year-old human remains. The egg features a depiction of what looks like 3 pyramids next to a river. Naturally, one would assume that these are the pyramids of Giza, which were built beside the Nile River. But there's one major problem. Most experts believe that the pyramids were built around 4,500 years ago, making them far younger than the ostrich egg. So, is the image on the egg the result of an ancient artist being able to see thousands of years into the future? Not necessarily. For one, nobody knows for sure exactly how old the pyramids are. Because they're made of stone, it's impossible to date them using traditional scientific methods like radiocarbon dating. Moreover, the pyramids lack significant inscriptions that might otherwise help researchers properly date them, such as pharaohs' names. So perhaps there's less of a timing discrepancy than there seems to be. On another note, however, the dimensions of the triangles drawn on the egg do not proportionally coincide with the size differences between the pyramids of Giza. They also don't seem to align with the size or construction of any other pyramids, leading experts to conclude that they represent something else. But some pseudo-archaeology enthusiasts still choose to perceive the artwork as evidence that Egypt's dynastic era and the associated massive construction projects began much earlier than scholars claim. Number 3. The Sphinx is 800,000 years old. Nobody knows how old the Great Sphinx is. The ancient Egyptians left behind no written records of it, and like the pyramids, it can't be radiocarbon dated because it's made of stone. But most experts believe that the monument was constructed between 2558 and 2532 BC, during the reign of the pharaoh Khafra. In 2018, a pair of Ukrainian scientists claimed that the Sphinx is actually 800,000 years old. Citing evidence of water erosion, they theorized that it existed at a time when the Giza Plateau was partially flooded. The duo further explained that during the early Pleistocene period, there were numerous freshwater lakes in the region, and that the level of so-called erosion matches up with the water surface level at the time. Mainstream experts vehemently rejected these claims. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs, told PBS that not a single ancient Egyptian artifact or ruin more than 5,000 years old has been found. While it is certainly true that the Sphinx is shrouded in mystery, it's almost preposterous to believe it's 800,000 years old. Modern humans did not evolve until around 200,000 years ago, give or take, and people did not give up hunting and gathering in favor of permanent settlements until around 12,000 years ago. As exciting as it may seem to buy into the idea that advanced civilizations sprang up far earlier than scholars believe, it simply makes no sense. Unless, of course, you believe that ancient aliens may have put it there. At that point, all bets are off. Number 2. The pyramids were used for storing wheat. In 2015, then presidential candidate Ben Carson made headlines for his belief that the biblical character Joseph actually built the pyramids for storing grain. Most people are taught at a young age that the pyramids were pharaohs' tombs. This makes it difficult to understand how a highly educated person like Ben Carson, who is a neurosurgeon by day, could subscribe to a biblical theory that runs contrary to scholarly knowledge. But he's not the only person who believes this. The granary theory is based on the Old Testament, which describes how Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt. Joseph interpreted a pharaoh's dreams and took them as a sign to store grain, which helped Egypt survive a 7-year famine. The Bible does not mention the pyramids. According to the BBC, people began incorporating them into the story during the Middle Ages. Speaking with the news outlet, Egyptologist John Darnell pointed out that the medieval St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice features an image of people using the pyramids of Giza as granaries. A 6th century bishop named Saint Gregory of Tours encouraged this belief, describing Joseph's grain storage structures as, quote, wide at the base and narrow at the top, end quote. The theory persisted until the Renaissance, when it fell out of favor amid more thorough studies of the pyramids. Which is good, because it's probably untrue. As Darnell mentioned, the pyramids predate the time of the story of Joseph by several centuries. He also explained that the pyramids' design would be inefficient and impractical for storing grain. But as Ben Carson proved to the world just 6 years ago, there are still some die-hard believers who reject scholarly thought. Number 1. The ancient Egyptians traveled to the Americas. It's a well-established fact that the ancient Egyptians drank wine and were involved in the opium trade. But it came as a surprise when in 1992, German toxicologist Svetla Balabanova and her 2 colleagues reported findings of cocaine, nicotine, and hashish in Egyptian mummies. Many experts were quick to dismiss these claims, since those drugs are derived from plants that are endemic to the Americas. But some people took the findings as evidence that the Egyptians beat Columbus to the New World by several thousand years. After all, what other explanation could there be? There are a few possibilities, believe it or not. Of course, the mummies could have easily been contaminated by their surroundings over the years. Also, the mummies could be forgeries, which were popular during the 19th century amid poor record keeping. And there's the chance that the tests performed on the mummies yielded false positives for drugs. Above all, historians do not believe a pre-Columbian trade route existed between the Americas and Egypt. Is it impossible? No. But there's no evidence of the ancient Egyptians making transoceanic voyages, making it highly unlikely. If industrial commerce had occurred, there would likely be more in the way of artifacts and records to prove it. Not all researchers are dismissive of the findings, however. Some take it as a sign that we underestimate the capabilities of ancient societies, and that we tend to think of them as primitive and lacking mobility. Number 10. Severed fingers. In a shocking discovery, researchers have found evidence that prehistoric humans, our ancient ancestors who used to live in caves, would sometimes cut off their very own fingers in order to satisfy the bizarre deities that they worship. This discovery comes thanks to cave paintings in France, dated back 27,000 years, that show hands that have missing fingers. For a very long time, archaeologists couldn't figure out why so many hands were painted this way. It was a team of archaeologists working with the Simon Fraser University who figured out these people were cutting off their fingers in bizarre religious rituals that were undoubtedly very painful. Why were they doing this? Experts say it was an experience that may have helped some of the earliest groups of humans form strong bonds with one another. Researchers went back through historical records all the way to the 1600s looking for examples of finger amputation. The team was surprised to find that on every single continent inhabited by humans, there's at least one example of this disturbing practice. At least 121 societies throughout history have engaged in finger amputation, and those are the only ones that we know of. The cave we talked about earlier has hand paintings from at least 50 people, some of them even children. A large portion of them were missing their fingers. However, the only thing researchers don't know is what these rituals look like or who exactly practiced them. Number 9. Baby mummy. There is a baby mummy in St. Louis. The mummy was acquired by a dentist named Herman Moe at the turn of the century. He got it from somewhere in the Middle East, and the mummy ended up getting lost in the attic of one of his relatives before it was ultimately donated to the St. Louis Science Center back in 1985. We don't know exactly where the mummy came from, but by using new technology, researchers have figured out a little bit about its past. By analyzing the DNA, they learned that he had a European mother who most likely came from a wealthy family. They also learned that the mummy lived sometime between 30 BC and 130 AD, during the Roman period of Egypt, somewhere around the time of Cleopatra. CT scans showed that the child was only around 7 months old at the time of death, and also that he had a hole in his skull through which the brain was drained like wet jelly as part of the mummification process. And finally, the scans showed the incisions on one side of the child's body through which his internal organs had been removed and put inside of jars. But here's how the scientists know the child's mother was wealthy. They discovered amulets inside the child's body cavity and hidden within wrappings. These amulets were put inside the child as protection for its soul, while the cocoon of the wrappings protected its body. Number 8. Skinned cats and pagan rituals. 1,000 years ago in Spain, farmers were skinning cats as part of a weird magical ritual. Scientists found evidence of this bizarre practice at the archaeological site of El Bordellet in the east of the country. Highway construction back in 2010 led workers to discover a small trove of medieval artifacts. In more recent excavations in the same area, researchers found 9 mysterious pits, with some of them being filled entirely with animal bones. These bones are from pigs, horses, dogs, and even goats, but one of the pits had a bizarre amount of feline remains. There were about 900 cat bones found inside the pit, with one of them carbon dated at being from somewhere between the years 970 and 1025 AD. These cats were skinned, Scientists determined this because of cut marks on the bones consistent with what you get when skinning an animal. All the cats were between 9 and 20 months old when they died, the age at which cat fur is best used, apparently. This isn't alarming right away, as skinning cats to make clothing has been going on for a very long time. The cat fur trade was even booming in the Middle Ages. However, these cats were skinned for a different reason. This was magic. Along with the cat bones, archaeologists found horse skulls, fragments of goat horn, and chicken eggshells. This was definitely part of some kind of strange magic ceremony, but what kind is unknown. Did you know that cat pelts were popular for clothes? What do you think of this? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 7. Castle sacrifices. The skeletons of 3 humans murdered as part of a weird sacrifice have been found within the foundations of a castle in South Moravia, dating back 1,000 years. The castle is in the Czech town of Břeclav, and the people here died in 1041 AD. The castle was once a strategic stronghold on the Dje River, protecting the area from attacks. Archaeologist Miroslav Dejmal of the Masaryk University says the people were most likely murdered while the castle was being built and then literally made into its foundation, as he says the chances of all 3 men dying by accident is pretty slim. Their bodies were placed on the first layer of stones being used to construct a rampart. We don't know who these men are right now, but the experts say they could have been prisoners of war, being used as slaves to build the stone walls before they were executed. There's actually a term for this that archaeologists use: foundation sacrifice. It happened more in medieval times than most people realize. In the Dark Ages, some people believed that building a structure on natural land was an indignity to the deities of that land. To appease them, people were often murdered and then their bodies mixed in with the foundations. Some historians believe foundation sacrifices were the inspiration for the haunted house stories we still talk about today. Number 6. Pompeii Mummy. Archaeologists working in the ruined Italian city of Pompeii have discovered a scary, partially mummified skeleton. The skeleton was once a slave who toiled in the city of Pompeii before it was decimated by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 AD. Experts say that so far, this is the best preserved skeleton they have ever found in the city. Shockingly, the dead man still has white hair clinging to his scalp. He was found buried inside an ancient tomb in the necropolis of Porta Sarno, located in the urban center of Pompeii. At this point, you might be wondering why a slave was discovered inside of his very own tomb. Well, archaeologists are trying to piece together that story. They discovered him beneath a marble slab with an inscription on it that identified him as Marcus Venerius Secundio. He was definitely wealthy at the time of his death, but he had been born poor and at one point had even been a slave before being freed. An inscription on his tomb appears to indicate that he helped stage performances of Greek plays. It reads that the deceased gave Greek and Latin ludi, or performances. Wax tablet records kept by a Pompeian banker note that Secundio was enslaved and he served in the Temple of Venus, but he rose through the social ranks once he was freed and then joined the Augustalis priesthood, an imperial cult. Secundio died when he was about 60 and was buried in the impressive tomb befitting his improved social status just before the volcano blew its top. Number 5. Midland Kings. Over the couple hundred years, at least 150 bodies have been pulled out of the bogs in Ireland. Nobody is exactly sure why so many people were buried in the Irish bogs, but experts say they were likely victims of murder. Even more shocking is that the Irish bog bodies were almost always killed using excessive violence. Many of the bodies recovered from the bogs in modern times have been found with their throats slit open, stabbed repeatedly in the heart, and cut up as if by a mad butcher. Ned Kelly, former employee of the National Museum of Ireland, believes the reason these people were murdered so brutally and dumped into bogs is that they were in fact Midland kings, rulers of the Midlands, where all the most important kingdoms were in ancient Ireland. He thinks they were massacred on purpose after volunteering to give up their lives for the goddess they believe looked after their fertile lands. But there's more to it than that. For example, a bog body known as Old Krogan Man was discovered in a bog back in 2003 with his nipples cut off. Ouch. In medieval Ireland, cutting off someone's nipples was a type of torture reserved for dethroning a king. During hard times in Ireland, the first one to be sacrificed for the good of the nation to the goddess was always the ruler. So the theory here is that all the scary bog mummies that have turned up are actually dead Irish kings brutalized by their own people during hard times. Number 4. Ancient infants. Excavators working at the Upper Sun River archaeological site in central Alaska have made a tragic, terrifying, and rather surprising discovery. They have uncovered the skeletons of 2 young infants buried together beneath what had once been a hut used by early Native Americans. Analysis of the bones showed that one of the infants had died after birth while the other was just a fetus and had been stillborn. Radiocarbon dating proved that they were laid to rest over 11,000 years ago. That's before basically any developed culture in the world. Even more shocking is that the DNA showed that the infants came from different mothers that belonged to genetically distinct groups. In other words, they were not from the same ethnic background. What begins as a shocking and tragic story turns into one that's quite fascinating, as this shows that the first people who moved into America across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia were from different backgrounds. This is an area of history that scientists have been struggling for years. We know that the first migrants into America came from Siberia, but scientists haven't been able to figure out if these people came in waves or as one large, ethnically diverse group. Now, with the discovery of these 2 babies being buried together in the same hut but from 2 different backgrounds, it's safe to say that the first Americans were a very diverse group. Number 3. Demon traps. Demon traps have been found in ancient Sardis in modern-day Turkey. These demon traps were discovered buried under the floor of an ancient house, crafted 2,000 years ago. The archaeologists who found the demon traps believe they were part of a ritual to stave off disaster. They were likely built after an earthquake devastated Sardis in the year 17 AD. They were found under the floor of a room that had been built after the quake, probably by whoever lived there in hopes that the next earthquake wouldn't bring their roof down again. But what does a demon trap look like? Each demon trap consists of a bowl with a few quirky artifacts inside of it, an eggshell, some bronze nails, and a coin. One of the coins had the depiction of Zeus Ledios on it, the father god of the local religion at the time. Another coin had the image of Cybele on it, another popular goddess that was heavily worshipped. For an unknown reason, eggs and bronze tools have been used for millennia to protect people against evil forces, often being found in witch bottles and anywhere associated with cult magic. These traps weren't actually made to catch demons, but they were artifacts meant to have magical powers. Number 2. The Black Drink. Researchers investigating the ruins of Cahokia, a massive settlement near the Mississippi River that was last inhabited by Native Americans around 700 years ago, have found a mysterious black drink. The discovery of the black drink was made by analyzing plant residue found inside pottery beakers uncovered from the surrounding area. And while at first it seems a bit creepy to know that the ancient people here had been drinking black liquid out of beakers, they may have actually just been a bunch of caffeine addicts. The black brew was made from the leaves of the holly tree and heavily caffeinated. It is so far the earliest known use of the black drink. Cahokia itself is also quite the mystery. It was one of the biggest cities north of the Aztec Empire that appeared in the year 1100 and then vanished 200 years later, leaving behind only a spattering of relics and no large ruins or temples to speak of. Europeans first recorded the Native Americans consuming the black drink when they arrived a few hundred years later. It was a type of tea made from roasted leaves of the yapan holly that contained caffeine. The drink wasn't really coffee though, as it was 6 times stronger than the strongest coffee available today. It often induced sweating, vomiting, and general sickness. It was only consumed before battle or before extremely important events. It was basically like drinking pure black caffeine and getting so caffeinated that you barf everywhere. And if you ask me, it seems like the worst possible thing to drink before going into battle. Number 1. Scary Stone Mask. A stone mask that looks like something a psychopath would wear while torturing someone in their basement had been unveiled by the Antiquities Authority in Israel. The stone mask dates back 9,000 years and is unlike anything archaeologists have found before. The mask features 2 wide eye holes, a thin mouth with the etchings of teeth around it, and a short nose. It was also drilled along its edges so that a person could secure it to their face using string. Nobody knows what on earth this terrifying mask was used for, if it had belonged to a local magician or some kind of Neolithic maniac. Unfortunately, archaeologists don't even know where it came from. It was acquired by a theft prevention unit back in 2018, confiscated from somebody who got it from somebody else, leaving archaeologists in the dark as to the origins of the haunting mask. And although nothing exactly similar has been found before, there are 15 masks known to scientists that date back to around the same time as this one, between 9,000 and 10,000 years ago. But these are held in private collections, and archaeologists haven't been able to study them, so they don't know if the masks all belong to a prehistoric cult or what. Thanks for watching. Which of these disturbing discoveries freaked you out the most? Let us know about it in the comments, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for all the best videos from the channel. See you next time. Bye!